Many often misconstrued value for money with low cost, and that's where I think this phone gets a little dicey. For £179 in the UK or €199 in Europe, or in the US some unconfirmed pricing, the Nord N100 is completely the opposite of the high price, high performance ultra flagships that we're used to seeing in 2020. It comes in at around half the price of even the Pixel 4a and OnePlus Nord. This is a proper budget smartphone. Let's get into it. What is the Nord N100? Well, it's a super cheap plastic smartphone with a Gorilla Glass coated 720p display that's laid out in the similar kind of way as the Nord and the OnePlus 8T, both much higher end phones. As for the specs, well, there's a Snapdragon 460, 4GB of RAM, 64GB of storage, 4 total cameras, a 720p 90Hz IPS display, and a huge 5000 mAh battery. That's a very mixed spec sheet, but in short, not a lot of power, but a great battery. OnePlus cut a lot of corners to get this thing down to £179 in the UK, and the most obvious of which is definitely in its performance. It's not unusable by any means, but the N100 is markedly slower than the OnePlus Nord and the Pixel 4a, neither of which is particularly powerful. Zipping around the OS with the Snapdragon 460 and 4GB of RAM isn't the smoothest experience in the world, and it does put the decision to use a 90Hz display into question when oftentimes it's barely able to match 60Hz. The 64GB of storage is expandable with a microSD card up to 256GB, which is handy. This isn't a gaming phone. Most games run on it and they look okay, but they do stutter and lag rather often, especially the more demanding ones. For games like Clash Royale and 8-Ball, you should be alright though. But here's the thing, and I hark back to the start of this video where we were talking about value for money versus budget. Sure, this is a budget smartphone, but its value for money is questioned when the performance is slow now. In 6 months, when the performance has degraded, is it even going to be worth keeping, or are you going to want to upgrade? At which point, have you really saved any money if you're going to be buying 2 smartphones? However, because this chipset is such a power sipping component, the battery life is fantastic. I mean truly brilliant. With a mixture of LTE and Wi-Fi connections, high brightness, Spotify and YouTube usage, and a lot of Twitter and Reddit scrolling, I got 2.5 days out of the Nord N100 as my main phone. That's 8 hours total screen on time, and it was definitely not easy. It was hard to kill this thing, and I put it through its paces, so a lighter user and with less usage, I wouldn't be surprised if you were able to charge this thing just twice a week. And the thing is, it's nice that you won't have to charge it so often, because the 18-watt charger included in the box, whilst it's not super slow, does still charge this thing in just over 2 hours. So it actually does take a little while to charge it, and it being a huge battery, it does make sense. This isn't a flagship, it's not got super fast charging. I think it's rather respectable, but at the same time, it's not going to help you in a pinch. Thankfully, you probably won't be in a pinch very often with a battery that's this good. Oxygen OS, which runs on this thing, is outdated out of the box, unfortunately. It's Android 10 based instead of Android 11, which the OnePlus 8T, an older device, came with. Doesn't really make much sense there. And this thing is only likely to get 1 software platform update. What this means is that long-term software support isn't going to be very good, with only 1 software platform update coming forward. And this isn't the most up-to-date version, meaning you're not going to get all the new features that the new Oxygen OS allows for. Another area in which value for money and cost really have not met is in the display. It's a 90Hz 720p panel, and while the sharpness or lack thereof isn't much of an issue, I feel like the use of a full HD or even standard HD 60Hz panel would have been a better bet. See, the Nord N100 doesn't really have the processing or GPU chops to consistently hit 90Hz, which makes it kind of a redundant spec. From about 30 centimeters or a foot away from your face, the display's sharp enough, but every now and then you do notice the softness, which can be a little distracting. I actually think the better bet would have been to put a 60Hz display in this thing and then use that extra budget to improve the performance or the camera. And talking of cameras, they were never going to be groundbreaking in a £179 phone, and I'm just going to tell you, they weren't with the N100. However, they were considerably worse than what we've seen from the competing Redmi Note 9, and these images do look kind of weird. But before that, firstly, the two main cameras that you really need to know about are the 8 megapixel selfie camera and 13 megapixel main rear camera. Those other two on the back are really just to fluff out the spec sheet. What you'll really notice in these samples is that the typical OnePlus shadow crushing is here, but maxed out to a whole new level. Just look at how much the shadows are crushed in these outdoor shots, and with such soft lighting, these are much easier conditions than the harsh direct sunlight, in which this thing would perform even worse. Another point of interest is the oversaturation of the colours. They don't look awful, but they're not exactly true to life, and probably the biggest thing to note is the lack of sharpness in any of these images. No, you don't need to wipe your screen, they really are that soft. Some might blame the 13 megapixel sensor, but since the Pixel 5 has a 12 megapixel sensor, I don't think you can really blame resolution here. Strangely though, the selfies look a lot sharper than the main camera photos. They're actually not bad at all. They're soft-ish, but nothing crazy. Skin smoothing just definitely isn't an issue here. Even in harsh lighting conditions and in portrait mode, the N100 manages to do quite well. So, should you go out and buy this thing? Well, if you're on a budget, you should consider it, but you should also consider like the Redmi Note 9 from Xiaomi is a fantastic smartphone that, at least on paper and from reviews, seems to be crushing this thing. It costs maybe £20 more, but it gives you much more value for money. However, if you can really stretch to it, I urge you to save a little more and try and get a OnePlus Nord or a Pixel 4a, because you're going to get better software support down the line, much better hardware, much later slowdown in terms of the performance, hugely better cameras, hugely better designs, and hugely better overall user experiences. And since you're less likely to upgrade those phones sooner, it means that you could actually be saving money by doing it that way. And that brings us back to the start of this video where I said that value for money and cost are typically misconstrued. See, there is a point where spending too little won't give you as much value, and the OnePlus Nord N100 is just an example of this. It cuts too many corners and seems like OnePlus's attempt to grab another sector of the smartphone market. Anyway guys, that's it from me, and that's it for the OnePlus Nord N100 video. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do check out the full article in the video description, which will have way more camera samples on there and more analysis, since I can go into more detail in a longer form article. Whilst you're down there, please do hit like and subscribe to never miss a video like this one. I've been Ryan Thomas with Android Authority, and I'll catch you later.